The Greek cross is a fine quilt block that is made with two fabrics, a light and a dark. And today I'm going to show you how to make a 5-inch version. Welcome to Epida Studio. My name is Elizabeth and I help you make beautiful things with quilting, pojagi, and embroidery. So today I'm going to show you how to make the Greek cross quilt block. And this is a block that is traditionally done with two fabrics, a light and a dark. So I'm using this dark green fabric and this white fabric that has really great contrast. And I don't know where the name Greek cross comes from, but I do think this is a really fun block. So once you've chosen your two fabrics, let's get started. So to make the Greek cross block, you're going to need 12 light 1.5 inch squares, 12 dark 2.5 inch squares, two 1.5 by 2.5 inch rectangles, and one 1.5 by 5.5 inch rectangle. And we're going to begin by making some half square triangles. And for these, I'm going to be using what I call the easiest ever method for half square triangles. And this isn't always the method that I would use, but this is the method I use in this case because I'm making very small half square triangles. So with this method, it's easier to get it accurate. There is a bit of waste, but in this case, you will see it's just a tiny bit of waste because of the size. So we are going to use 8 of the light squares and 8 of the dark squares. So don't do it with all of the squares because you're going to need some of those squares later, but 8 light and 8 dark, and we're going to use those to make the half square triangles. So this method involves drawing a diagonal line on the back of the light square, putting them right sides together, and then stitching right on that line, then cutting off the excess and pressing it back. So if you want to see a full detailed tutorial, I do have another very detailed tutorial for how to do this technique. But basically, you're just stitching corner to corner and then cutting off the excess. And we can see in this situation that waist corner is going to be pretty small because these are going to be pretty small. So with your 1.5 inch squares, we're making half square triangles. So here's what it looks like after it has been stitched. You can see I've trimmed off this corner and that is not much at all. And then when I open it up and press it, it will look like this. And this should be 1.5 inches square. So that's why this is the easiest ever method, because you just cut the size that you're going to want and then stitch. There's no difficult arithmetic to figure out or to remember. You just cut the size that you want. So now we're going to make the corner pieces for the block, and the corner pieces are all the same. So we're going to make 4, 1 for each corner. So for each corner, we're going to need 2 half square triangles and then 1 light square and 1 dark square. And then we're just going to put them together with the dark and the light squares going in opposite corners, and then the half square triangles with the dark triangles pointing to the inside. And so we can see this kind of looks like an arrow when it is put together. So just be careful with the layout of the half square triangles. You don't want it like that. You don't want it like that. You want the dark triangles pointing to the inside. So we're going to make those by sewing them together in pairs. So we'll sew these two together and sew those two together, and then press the seams away from the half square triangle. So press it underneath the solid squares, and then you'll be able to join the two pieces together, and your seams will be able to nest nicely because they're pressed in opposite directions. So because there's 4 corners, we're going to make 4 units that look like this. So when they're all sewed together, this is what those little corner pieces are going to look like. These should be 2.5 inches square at this point. And now we're ready to begin laying out our block. Now, a lot of times when I'm laying out blocks, I say, oh, we put our pieces in rows and then put the rows together. This is kind of like that, but with a little twist. And so we have our top and our bottom of the block are the same. We have our corner piece with this little 2.5 inch strip in the middle, but then the middle of this block is this long 2.5 inch strip. So we see it's a plus sign or cross, like the name Greek cross, and then these little corner pieces go on. And these pieces all have the dark square pointing in toward the middle of the block. So now we are going to join the top and the bottom into rows, but the middle, there's nothing to join. It's just a straight strip. So the top and the bottom are going to be identical. It's a little strip with this little arrow on both sides. So we're going to stitch those together, and then we're going to have our 3 rows for the block. So here are the top and bottom pieces to the block. Just a note about these pieces, I pressed these seams so that both seams went underneath this strip in the middle. And the reason why I did that is because in this seam allowance, there's a cross seam and a diagonal seam. So pressing it back to the dark side would have this big bump here in the seam. So I pressed it this way. However, if pressing it this way was giving me dark shadows underneath and the fabric would have been visible through the light color fabric, then I could have pressed it back. So when I give pressing suggestions, I'm just suggesting what I would do in this situation and why I would do it, but feel free to press things a different way if you have a good reason for doing that. So now that we have the top and the bottom, we're just going to join those onto either side of this strip. These pieces should both be 5.5 inches long, so everything should line up nicely. So here's the finished block. This block should be 5.5 inches at this stage, so that in your finished quilt, it is 5 inches. So this block does have a lot of little pieces, but when you see how it goes together, it's not really difficult to construct. It kind of reminds me a little bit of a bear paw block. So if you want to see more 5-inch quilt block tutorials, you can check out my 5-inch block playlist or my post on my website that has that. And for lots more quilting tutorials, patterns, and inspiration, check out epidastudio.com.